The matter touching on disappearance, enforced disappearances in Kenya cannot be investigated locally by the arm of the government, namely the police, because the police are suspects.
Depending on where you're watching from, I greet you. Shalom. Now, today let's talk about, many days we talk about African countries, outside my own, we talk about US, the Caribbean. Now, today let's talk about Kenya. Something nasty has been happening in this country for some time now. And I believe that if you are somebody who watches news, or rather, if you are somebody who is interested on the matters of Africa and the issues affecting black people, you must have heard that we have a lot of abductions happening in this Republic of Kenya, my own country. In fact, some people are calling Kenya the Republic of Abduction, or the capital of abduction. There is a lot of abductions that has happened in the recent months, ever since we had the historical, anti-taxation, or rather the anti-finance bill 2024, when almost every youth came outside their house, including myself. We went and we demonstrated peacefully against the draconian finance bill of 2024. Ever since that time we had that demonstration, we've had cases of abductions from families, we've had from friends, we've had from old people, The police has been abducting individuals who they thought were people of key interest, or persons of interest. I believe they think that these people are the ones who are leading the abductions. And these abductions were happening. You walk and you just see a car following with you, you walk and you just see a car behind you, and normally they use Subaru cars, yeah? The police in Kenya, they like using Subaru cars, the Forester and the Outback. And so people have been abducted. We've had many of these people who have been abducted have gone missing, never been found. The ones who have been found, most of them are dead, yeah? But fortunately enough, we've found that some of these people who have been abducted have been found to be alive, but just a few of them, Kenyans took it upon themselves and they decided that the abductions need to end, because it was their government right, it was their human right, it was their constitutional right to have demonstrations, yeah? And so they have decided to take this case of abductions to the ICC, the International Criminal Court, the court that deals with governments that are pervasive, governments that are murderous, governments that are abductive, like the ones of William Samoei Ruto, who is the second most corrupt president in the whole world. Not according to me, but according to the statistics that have been given. Number one being Tinubu. So Kenyans have decided, no, this has to come to an end. We've also had anti-abduction protests in Kenya, where people have come forward. The people who are demonstrating against these abductions, the police, they are being fired on, the tear gas and the water, that water which is itchy is poured onto them. You see, it's hard for us Kenyans sometimes, but I don't want to talk much into this because I'm also having mixed reactions. I want us to watch this, and then I shall give you my thoughts by the end of the video, where we shall also have a deep critical analysis.
And this follows the latest abduction of human rights activist Maria Tihai, who has allegedly been kidnapped by 3 armed men in Kenya, and this before being released hours later. The Tanzanian independent media editor and human rights defender is known for her criticism of the Tanzanian government on a range of issues. Now, the Kenyan Intelligence Service has been accused of conducting abductions following widespread protest from June last year. And for more on these latest abductions in Kenya, we're joined virtually now by Irungu Houghton, who's Section Director for Amnesty International Kenya. Irungu, thanks so much for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning, Sakina. Good morning, South Africans.
Perhaps a good place to start would be to just give some context in recent years with regard to abductions, be they human rights or politically related.
Well, this is not the first time we've seen an enforced disappearance. And of course, the colonial government used it in the 1940s and 50s to mass incarcerate many of our freedom fighters. More recently, in the last 6 months, we've seen up to 83 abductions allegedly by the security services, as documented by the Kenya National Commission for Human Rights. And of course, we've seen cases of refugees, the Turkish refugees, 7 in number, who were abducted, and 4 of them were forcibly returned back to Turkey just recently. And of course, the case of Dr. Kisa Besigye and the 36 other opposition parliamentarians that were essentially abducted from Kenyan soil on 2 separate occasions and taken back to Uganda. So the abduction of Maria Sarungi Chesai basically falls into that pattern of enforced disappearances.
So many are saying that this seems to point to a relapse in Kenya's human rights gains since June last year, in particular after the June 25th riots. As Amnesty International, you've also, voiced your concerns about this and about the fact that many of these abductions take place under the guise of counter-terrorism.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen the use of, I guess, what in the security services they call counterterrorism assets being used on protesters, cartoonists, people in the streets of Nairobi, people who are active on social media. And as Amnesty International, we've been saying consistently that this has to stop, that there has to be a way in which the state responds to valid, non-violent criticism of its governance record at this time. And we will continue to do so, whether it is the use of excessive force in the streets of Nairobi and other towns, or whether it is attempts to, detain unlawfully people who are speaking out on the social media platforms.
And to that point, Irungu, perhaps you could just explain to those who may not be au fait with what's actually happening in Kenya, what is happening with the government and those who dissent against some of what government is doing.
Yeah, well, the recently elected, I guess 2 years ago, the recently elected Kenya Kwanza administration faced a round of political party oppositional strikes and demonstrations last year. We call them the Sufuria Revolution, which was essentially a call towards reducing the cost of living, concerns about the the elections of 2022. And then this year, there's been literally a uprising of young Kenyans, young emerging leaders who have initially rallied around a finance bill that sought to increase taxes in what was considered to be a very punitive way. That has then coalesced around a movement that has basically called the government to resign. And really the last 6 months have seen tremendous pressure by the public on the government to reform itself, to clean up its human rights record, and to stop the corruption that people are very concerned about. So that's really the context for the protests that have been happening in Kenya. And of course, it's happening at a time when Kenya is extending its international profile, its reputation into the global arena. Kenya, for example, this year has just joined the UN Human Rights Council. There are some very advanced conversations about making Nairobi the capital, the third global hub of the United Nations. And of course, several other initiatives, like, for example, the initiative rallying around the Right Honorable Raila Odinga to become the next African Union Commission chairperson. So there are great international, issues at stake here also, not just domestic human rights violations concerns.
And if we look at, say, the last 5 years or so as Amnesty International, how many of these abductions have you actually reported?
Well, the Missing Voices Alliance, an alliance of several human rights organizations, including Amnesty, run a ongoing monitor, and they have a website, missingvoices.co.ke, and they have been documenting almost now for about 6 years not just enforced disappearances, but also extrajudicial killings. On average, I guess over this period, maybe the last decade, we've seen about 150 extrajudicial killings, and probably about 15 to 20 on average enforced disappearances. The last 6 months have seen a real spike. I mean, we've seen 83 cases of abductions, and in some cases, people have been held up to 32 days. They've not had access to lawyers, they've not had access to doctors, they have been subjected to cruel and inhuman punishment. And it's not just the analysis of human rights organizations. The president came out a week ago and acknowledged that excesses had happened under his watch and that he would bring this to an end. Only last week, in fact, to this day, 5 out of the 6 abductions that took place over the Christmas period, where there was a major twist, as 5 out of the 6 abductees were returned back or released to the public, and they are now going through psychosocial counseling and legal debriefing. So there's been major concerns, I think, over the last 6 months in terms of enforced disappearances. South Africans will probably know the International Convention on to End Enforced Disappearances has been in effect for several years now, and Kenya has not yet ratified that. We are now demanding that they do that and that they open up what has been happening to international scrutiny so that we have an independent, fair and impartial analysis of who is responsible and who must be held accountable.
And speaking of accountability, as you say, Irungu, government has acknowledged these abductions, but has there been any form of accountability from the security services?
We have seen no single arrest or conviction of any police officer for the 63 deaths that have happened during protests over the last 6 months. And we have seen no arrest or conviction of any police officer of any agency for the abductions that have been happening since June.
Well, just the final one, Irungu, with regard to those who say that you look at what's happening in Kenya now and you can trace it all the way back to the tenure of President Moi's time, and similar links can be drawn. What's your view on that? Do you think that this is something, a sort of hangover in the Kenyan body politic?
I mean, I think there are lots of parallels that can be raised with the 1990s. Just to give you an example, the number of people who have died in protests over the last 6 months are 3 times the number that died during the multi-party protests in 1990, 1991. So there are some parallels that we need to draw. But I think it's really important to make the point that in the context of this particular situation, the national government has a responsibility to uphold national sovereignty. It is insane that we should not be able to protect not just Kenyans against enforced disappearances, but actually foreigners who come to live in Kenya, not just business people like Maria, but also refugees who are protected by the UN Geneva Convention. So I think cross-border repression has to be looked at more closely, not just by the Kenyan government and human rights organizations, but I think by the international community as a whole. Otherwise, Kenya will cease to be the sanctuary for refugees and asylum seekers, as it has been for the last 30 years or more. And just to remind the listeners that, the viewers, that we have something like about 800,000 asylum seekers and refugees currently on Kenyan soil.
You know, it is a constitutional and a human right for people to demonstrate when they feel like the government that they elected into power is not serving the function they elected them to do. You understand? It is a universal human right. It's a universal journalist right. It's a universal citizenship right for everyone to demonstrate. Peaceful demonstration is not a harm to the government. Peaceful demonstration is not something that is, we can't call it a coup, you understand? And now the government have been acting like it was a coup attempt. No, we didn't, we were not planning for a coup, not yet, you know? But at this time when you see abductions happening, for Kenyans to decide that they are going to report it to the ICC, just like the Luo individual, the African brother has said, it is something which, if not taken care of, will be a disease. Kenya will be turned into those countries such as the kind of government that Mobutu Sese Seko had with these people in Congo. You know, you couldn't raise your voice, you couldn't say nothing. The kind of government that Charles Taylor of Liberia had with those people of that West African country. It took the hand of the ICC, International Criminal Court, to come in between and to save the nationals. First of all, we need to understand that criticism, nobody is beyond or above criticism. A president is not above criticism. We can never say that nobody is above the law. You understand? That's why we have multipartism. We have multipartism to correct or to punctuate, you know, the relationship that the government is having with the people. The government might be squandering. It is the work of the opposition to inform the citizens. So multipartism is a form of criticism. But in Kenya, we find that the youth are coming up front. They are demonstrating against abductions. They are demonstrating against high cost of living. But when we try and do this, what happens? We are being abducted. One thing I'm always surprised with is this. The people who abduct people, the people who abduct people who are citizens, these abductors are police, you know. And these police, they have families, right? Yeah, they have families, boys, children. They also have parents. They are children to some other people, you know. And now, we who are demonstrating, we are also demonstrating for their children. It's not like we are demonstrating for our own self. No, we are not doing that for ourselves. We are demonstrating for the whole community of Kenya, you know. So them coming up front and abducting people and maybe going and torturing them and maybe terminating them is not something that will go well even for their children. Because I believe that one time, no matter how long it takes, if a president did not rule justly, the law will catch up with them and they will be arrested. We've had those countries where a president was arrested because they didn't serve their country well. They were corrupt, they squandered. You may not be arrested while in power, but you'll be arrested by the end time. By the time you reach, you finish, you know, your presidency. Abductions is a sign of weakness. The government which abducts its citizen is not capable of ruling them. Why would you abduct people? It's a sign of weakness, you know. What are you afraid of? These are just children, you know. I'm surprised that even journalists are being abducted by the Kenyan police. A journalist who has an internationally recognized human right, no matter where they go, if they have that badge to show that they are journalists, even terrorists do not touch them. But now the Kenyan government is coming up front and touching them. This shows how much backward Africans we are. It shows how much wicked we are as black people. You understand? The other day it was the IMF which was pushing things around Kenya, and it was the duty of us as citizens to stand up and refuse the advances of the IMF to us. You know, Bill Gates has been coming to Kenya. He is trying to force us into accepting his GMO. The president is always in for his advances because he knows that Bill Gates is one of the richest people, and he will give him a cut of something. You know, when Bill Gates gives you a cut of something, that's a very huge sum, particularly for an African country. But what about the rest of the population? What about it? You know, we think that forever these people will live into power. No. Even Idi Amin died. Even Mugabe died. Even Nelson Mandela died. Even Gaddafi died. Everyone has a limited amount of time in this space we call Earth. But once you realize that you have that limited amount of time in this space, you should live your life rightfully. You should live your life in the pursuit of serving your people. When you serve your people, you serve the one who created you as well. But we tend to forget that, and we only seek the earthly things at the expense of other people. And I believe This is hypocrisy of the highest order. Yep. This is EFK Original Documentaries. If you like what I do,